And
I've
I was
done that
I
before.
was thinking that since you're only going to keep the recording available for 7 days, that what we could offer to people is the PDF with the speaker notes, because it has the slide thumbnail and the notes on the bottom of it. So I don't know
Yeah.
about the mechanics of getting that if a whole bunch of people want it, but
Yeah,
Jared, could we just
yeah,
send it
that's
out?
yeah, that's easy enough because we've got everyone's email address. We could just send it as an attachment, as long as that attachment isn't a large file, and I don't imagine it would be if it were a PDF.
yeah, it isn't that large. I'd send it to you as an email attachment. So,
Yeah.
do you have any other questions for me or suggestions before we begin?
I don't think so.
All
We'll
right.
just
Say again.
well, I'm just going to say we'll just wait for our public to join us here.
Sure.
Um,
Well, I think I have the timing down correct, so we'll have a solid 15 or more minutes for Q&A.
Perfect.
Great.
I'm gonna go ahead and Deborah's on. If it's okay with you all, I'll go ahead and let her in just so she can say hi to you, Randy.
Oh, sure.
Okay, great. Good evening, Deborah.
Hi, good evening, Lauren. How are you?
I'm all right. Can I introduce you virtually to our speaker tonight? This is Randy.
Yes. Hi, Randy. How are you? It's nice to meet you.
Hi, Deborah. Oh, it's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for supporting these programs.
Well, thank you for your incredible research. I'm very excited to hear what you're going to share with us tonight. And I apologize for my setting. I'm in a hotel room in Lafayette, Indiana, at Purdue University. It's not very glamorous, but
Uh,
the best I can do. But thank
Well,
you so much.
we're just glad to have you.
Thank you. And Lauren, I think we have a big group joining tonight, don't we?
We do. I think it was well over 100.
It was 150.
150. Yeah,
Great.
Wow.
Great. Great.
I've presented to rooms that large, but I've never done anything on Zoom that large.
Well, it'll be easier on Zoom, I'm sure, than in a room, but you'll be great.
Well, it is kind of fun to kind of read the room and see if anybody's paying attention or
Yes.
looking at their phones or asking each other questions. What is that guy talking about?
We may even have some people from around the world, because I sent the link, Lauren, to a few colleagues, and I think some of my colleagues in Greece, another great maritime nation, they may be coming in even though it's late for them there.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. I'm glad you did that. Thank you. And I know we had somebody coming in from the West Coast as they asked about the Pacific time difference, so be all over.
We also invited Fred Hawker. I don't know if that's a familiar name to you, but he's in charge of the Vasa Museum in Sweden, even though he's an American.
That's great.
And he's helped me and other people on other research projects. So I hope he will be able to join. But as you say, it's going to be about midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning.
That's great. I'm just going to get a glass of water. I think we have a few minutes, don't we?
Yeah.
Still.
For sure.
I'm trying to think how to get rid of this thing behind me, but I don't really see how I can. Maybe I can turn the light off. Is that better or worse?
Well, we can see you better, I think. What do you think, Lauren?
Yeah, a little darker, but I
Yeah,
can see you.
it's hard for me to see. Anyway, I'm not the person to be seen. You are.
And Randy, we do have your monograph printed and in the library and everything. So
Oh,
people who
thank you
want to
so
follow up with that, you can sort of send them our way and we can share that great monograph with them.
much. I do mention that in my notes here. I decided that the only way to manage the time was to script this. So I hope it doesn't sound too stilted sometimes, but
I'm sure.
how's the volume? Is
It's
my
a little
volume
low on my end, but that might be my computer. Jared, is it okay with you? Muted.
Sorry. It sounds moderately high to me. I think if you can raise your volume a little bit, Randy, it would be better. But I don't think you sound soft.
how does it sound now?
That's a little bit better.
Okay.
Okay.
And now?
It sounds about the same.
Well, maybe that's as far as it will go.
That's pretty clear, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. That's good. Thank you for doing that.
Sure.
Deborah, will you be back in Marblehead at any point soon?
I was hoping to be there in September, but I'll be back on around October 15th. And confidentially, is anybody else listening right now or just us?
Just the
Just
four of
us.
us.
Confidentially, one of my dear friends, I think she's going to be on, is under contract for 6 Lee Street, the house of Susanna Glover.
Wow.
I said,
Okay.
she's part of the history now.
Oh my goodness. That's wonderful.
So I'll make sure I bring her over to the museum and everything, Lauren.
Please do.
Well, I wish I could make another trip back there. We had such a wonderful time visiting with you.
Where are you based, Randy?
I'm in Star, Idaho. My wife Rita and we moved here 8 years ago from Southern California.
Oh, wow.
Both of us spent most of our growing up and adult life. I lived on Cape Cod briefly in 68 and 69, and that further sparked my interest in maritime subjects. And I've been doing a lot of research toward a possible new biography of Howard Chappell. I don't know if that's a familiar name to you, but he's considered the Dean of American Maritime History, and you'll see his name float through this discussion.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, we're just at,
Yep.
Am I right?
Yep.
Just about 7. So I'll start letting people in if that's okay with you all, just so they can have a second to get in, get their audios worked out. So go ahead and do that.
I see a familiar name already.
Oh, good.
And another. Can the guests hear us yet?
Yes, they should be able to hear us now. Everybody who's in could let us know if you can hear us okay. Or I should say, if you can't hear us okay, please let us know.
We can hear you fine.
All right, I'm getting some thumbs up, so that's good.
Hello, Clay. Thanks for being on with us.
Pleasure, pleasure.
Wonderful. Just give some folks a few minutes to get
Lena,
in.
how are you?
Well, thank you.
Thanks for joining.
Lauren, I hope you're doing better.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. I've moved in from a cast to a boot, so I'm getting there slowly but surely. Thank you for asking. Great. Oh, we have people coming in fast and furious. I'm just gonna give one more minute and then we'll get started because we do have a full docket for tonight.
Hello, Gabrielle.
How's Lauren tonight? Are you walking?
Hi, Marcia. I am not quite walking, but I am out of the cast and I'm in a walking boot, but with no walking yet.
Okay.
Good to see
Progress
you.
is wonderful.
Good to see you.
Hello, Bob.
All right.
Hello,
Why don't
Eric. Hi,
I'm
Rob.
gonna, oh, sorry, didn't want to interrupt, but I'm thinking we should go ahead and get started. We want to be cognizant of your time, and there's a lot of great information to share with you. So I know people will be sort of coming in and joining us, but we'll go ahead and kick this off. We are recording tonight. Just so you all know, you should have gotten that information when you logged on. For those of you I have not met, because we have people from far and wide, it's exciting to see so many. My name is Lauren McCormick. I'm the executive director of the Marblehead Museum on the North Shore of Massachusetts. You can learn more about us at marbleheadmuseum.org. We have a number of sites and a very large collection of over 60,000 archival items, objects, photographs, and so on that document the history of the wonderful town of Marblehead. And for a couple of years now, we have had the privilege of hosting the annual Ambassador Michael Brackett Smith Memorial Lecture. And it's my great pleasure to introduce to you, first of all, Michael's beloved wife, Deborah Wynn Smith.
Thank you, Lauren, for those kind words and for hosting tonight's lecture in honor of my late husband, Michael Brackett Smith. I am just delighted to be here. I'm right now in Lafayette, Indiana at Purdue University, so excuse my background, but I'm joined tonight by my sons, Lieutenant Commander Deborah Smith and U.S. Major in the Marine Corps, Christian Smith. And we are very honored to sponsor this annual lecture that really focuses on the pivotal role of Marblehead and Marbleheaders in U.S. naval history from the time before our independence and all the way up through today. As many of you know, my late husband Michael's family roots in Marblehead were very much anchored in naval heritage and tradition and service to the nation. He chose the path of diplomacy, but many of his forebears were in the Navy. Michael's maternal grandfather, Captain Raymond Brackett, commanded the Atlantic transport vessel, the Lakeview, in World War I before becoming the aide-de-camp of Marshal Foch. And his maternal cousin's father, Robert Speck, served as a distinguished admiral in World War up to World War II and thereafter. In fact, commanding the destroyer Longshaw in the invasion of Okinawa, and then commander of the entire Atlantic fleet of destroyers and cruisers during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And the service continues with my sons. I just wanted to mention today is Robert Speck's birthday, so I'm really thrilled that his widow, Joan Speck, is with us tonight for the lecture, because it's really in his honor as well. As a devotee and learned scholar of American naval history, there was no vessel and ship more favored in Michael's heart than General Glover's schooner, the Hannah, put into the service of George Washington's First Navy to harass the British and to really lay the foundation for what has become the great Navy of the United States, our great blue water Navy. So it's very fitting tonight that we have the scholar Randy Biddle who's going to share with us very important research illumination about the role of Hannah and the other vessels, I'm sure, in George Washington's Navy as we look forward to celebrating our 250th anniversary of independence next year, already underway in Marblehead. So thank you, Lauren, for your leadership, and thank you, Randy, and we look forward to a wonderful discussion. And I want to thank everyone who's joined from across the country and some colleagues from around the world.
Thank you, Deborah, and thank you for you and your family members, your sons who are able to join us. Welcome to you all. I do want to, one housekeeping is to please mute yourselves while Randy is speaking, and we will have an opportunity for questions and answers at the end. So please go ahead. If you're not already, please make sure you're muted. It is my pleasure to introduce Randall McLean Biddle. Randy is an independent scholar, published author in maritime history, and a marine model artist. Beginning in 1981, he elected to emphasize studying and writing about specific vessels rather than broader maritime themes. He has published numerous journal articles, contributed commentary and book reviews, and presented his research at many museum and historical society venues. That focus identifies him as a vessel biographer. Often, Randy's study results in an intricately detailed scale model of the vessel. Some of them are held in private and institutional collections, in fact. In addition to thorough investigations into the origin story and appearance of the Pilgrim, the Medford-built brig made famous by Richard Henry Dana Jr. I'm going to mess this one up, Randy, so correct me if I get it wrong. Chaleur?
Correct.
Oh, wow. All right, good. An American-built British naval schooner, Grampus, the first American submarine launched in the Pacific Ocean. So in addition to those, of course, is the subject of this evening's presentation and discussion, John Glover's Marblehead schooner, Hannah. Sorry, I'm just letting somebody in. There we go. Randy first became interested in this Hannah in 1970 and returned to study her in depth in 2018. As was the case with the vessels just mentioned before and many others, Randy often travels to the locations where the original vessel was built and owned and the ports from which she operated, just as he and his wife Rita did with us in 2019, came to Marblehead. And Randy happily acknowledges and thanks more than 60 generous persons and institutions which contributed to this research. And we were so glad that we could help you out at Marblehead Museum. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Randy, for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Lauren, for the kind invitation to share my research on this famous Marblehead schooner. You're Jared Zeman for kind assistance incorporating new surprise content, and others from Marblehead Historical Commission and Historic Beverly about models named Hannah. It really is an honor to be part of your celebrations. Bob Craig, to whom this presentation is dedicated, and his wife Fran were dear friends of ours for many years. Bob's knowledge and generous help made it possible to tell a more accurate story about the battle between Hannah and Nautilus. The title comes from the study which was published in the Nautical Research Journal under the editorship of Paul E. Fontenoy and the website of the Nautical Research Guild. So let's look at this sort of carousel of slides preserving the history of our nearly 3-year fishing trip. The Naval Historical Division has long since published what it has to say about Hannah. Most of the historians who were intimately familiar with Washington's Navy are either dead or superannuated, and over the past 30 years, the division has moved on rapidly to other subject areas as diverse as the War of 1812 and Vietnam. The fact of the matter is, in reality, that very few people nowadays care anything much about Hannah, other than the vast minority of Beverly's and Marblehead's citizenry, and a few outside academics looking for tenure. An anonymous author in 1993. As it turns out, this author was not prophetic, but he does remind us how quickly we can forget our history. Vessel biography, well, simply put, it's telling the life story of a ship or a boat. Something I did with increasing frequency as I built upon my, quote, hobby of making ship models toward becoming a marine model artist with a goal of making a responsible model and one which creates a compelling impression of the original vessel. And may I say that our friend Rob Napier, who's on with us this evening, he's the one that introduced me to those two concepts of a responsible model and creating a compelling impression. So what did Glover's Hannah look like? Getting at a reliable interpretation of her appearance was the primary motivation of my study, quote, fishing for the truth. Today, the answer would depend upon which historical society or museum one visits. In Beverly, we have 3 representations. The one on the left in Hannah School in Beverly, the poster in the middle, a parchment poster sold by the Beverly Historical Commission in 1968, and then a recently introduced model at the Beverly Historical Commission. Or if we go to Marblehead, we see this gift to Marblehead Historical Commission in 2024 displayed in Abbott Hall. Or is it one of these, the 3 models in Marblehead? The leftmost 2 are both in Marblehead Museum, and the rightmost is in Abbott Hall. And then in major maritime museums, we have 2 examples here among several. This one in the Mystic Seaport Museum and Library, and this one in the Naval History and Heritage Command until recently. And then this Hannah, which I just discovered, was built for the Smithsonian Institution by Harold J. Cook and exhibited from about 1966 to 1970. Cook used the same lines plan and sail plan for this Hannah as were used for the model of Hannah now in storage at Peabody Essex Museum. It's possible that Russell Knight of PIM also employed Cook to build the model for PIM. Or maybe it's none of those. Well, let's find out. We examined more than a dozen models named for your Hannah in the highly regarded institutions, libraries, historical societies, and private collections. All of them are different. All of them are presented as a replica. If they're all different, how can they all be a replica? Moreover, if no one knows what your Hannah really looked like, how can any of them be replicas? Three main themes for the rest of our presentation and discussion. Number one, pardon me, why we challenged the commonly held view of her and what we discovered. The 10th October 1775 skirmish versus Nautilus, the Battle of Beverly Harbor, and afterward, using the appearance of Hannah to better interpret accounts of the battle, and then developing a new interpretation of her appearance. We have another segment about two attempts by the city of Beverly to build a full-size sailing Hannah to grace the harbor as a tourist attraction and cement Beverly's claim as the birthplace of the American Navy. We also have a survey of sources we used and data on the models that we studied. So by the end of the evening, I'd like to disabuse you of the notion that Hannah was a Marblehead heel topper fishing schooner of 78 tons of burthen, that after being hired by General George Washington, her bulwarks were pierced for carriage guns, cannons, which enabled her commanding officer as ordered to attack British shipping and take their cargoes, and that Hannah was the first armed vessel in the United States Navy. Also, some people claim, unbeknownst to General George Washington, after fighting the Nautilus, Hannah's name was changed to Lynch, and she sailed again, even to Europe. Well, here's what we found. Hannah was owned in Marblehead, but she wasn't built there. Rather, at Salisbury in 1765, and most locally by a builder named Swett or a builder named Hackett. She was a fish carrier, but not a fishing schooner per se, and she was also a West Indies trader. She was much smaller at 45 tons of burthen. Her bulwarks were not pierced for carriage guns because in her waist, which I'll explain in a moment, she had no raised bulwarks. She was armed with 3 or 4 pounder carriage guns and several swivel guns on her rail. It was Chad Smith's challenge to that oft-repeated claim that Hannah was a schooner of 78 tons burthen, which led to a completely new interpretation of her physical appearance. By recalculating the terms of her lease agreement in pounds, shillings, and pence, he arrived at a tons burthen very close to the 45 we will see in a moment. He came to 40 tons in that calculation. Tons burthen, by the way, is a measure of the internal carrying capacity of a hull. It's a series of calculations to approximate capacity, which evolved over the centuries. I mention that because burthen is not a measure of the weight of the vessel. The Admiralty draft or plan for Nautilus here shows a raised bulwark above her main deck in this region here, and this is called the waist, pierced with 4 gun ports for her carriage guns or her cannons. This Admiralty draft for Sultana shows no raised bulwarks above her main deck, and therefore nothing to pierce for gun ports. As we'll show, Sultana was similar in size, purpose, and time of construction to your Hannah, and therefore influenced our decisions on a new interpretation of Hannah. Here's another example. This is an American merchant brig of 1806. And note the absence of the raised bulwarks on her main and quarter decks. More on this drawing later, but if you look between the masts, this is the waist, you see these 2 pairs of vertical timbers. They embrace the muzzles of 2 small carriage guns or cannons with which Hannah was armed on each side. She had no bulwarks in the waist, therefore no need to pierce them for those cannon. Her rig. Well, when in service, she was rigged as a foretopsail schooner, possibly with a fore and main topsail. She carried a whaleboat of the form of colonial times, not the kind we think of associated with the whale ships of later years. She wasn't commissioned to attack British shipping, rather to intimidate British merchant crews into surrendering, literally terrorizing them into surrendering without a fight. That large crew made accommodations on board uncomfortable, so they returned to port each evening, which makes Hannah sort of a ancient days day sailor. Although this is an artist's concept, it's a good representation of the rig Hannah probably had as a fish carrier or West Indies trader. When hired by Washington, a foretopmast was added and a square foretopsail. She may have carried a topsail on her mainmast as well. Here's what that rig looks like on the modern copy of Sultana, a near contemporary of your Hannah. Note these white rectangles amidships. Those are padded safety nets in her waist to keep day sailing passengers from falling overboard. They're necessary because, as we showed, Sultana has no raised bulwarks above her main deck either. Ship models and paintings and other illustrations really are not absolutely dependable, nor are the presentations by a surprising number of authoritative institutions. We'll look at examples of models and paintings and these authorities soon. We'll also look at the sources which led to these claims, which I'll call the truth. None of the models claimed to be of this Hannah, and prominent museums, libraries, historical societies are accurate representations of the likely appearance of Glover's Hannah, because each are based on paintings, drawings, plans, or models of vessels that are of a later time and not representative of vessel design of an American or British merchant schooner of the mid-1760s. Similarly, none of the 20th century paintings, drawings, sketches are accurate because most all are based on those inaccurate models just described, or their purely and sometimes fanciful imagination. The first two truths would not have been discovered were it not for the work of Chad Smith and Russell Knight that I mentioned. The third is from my research, and we just spoke about the tons berth and discrepancy. On the next slide, we'll see further confirmation of her 45 tons berth, but I might make mention that one of the reasons that vessels of that period had no raised bulwarks, we're talking about merchant and fishing in the waist, is there was a fear that seawater would get trapped between those bulwarks and the scuppers weren't sufficient to allow it to pass overboard, so it might swamp or sink the vessel. I'm sorry. This is a British Naval Office shipping list from the port of Barbados. In British ports in North America and the Caribbean, a civilian employee called a naval officer kept meticulous records of the ownership, masters, crew, the comings and goings of privately owned vessels, and the cargoes they carried. From this document, we see that your Hannah was 45 tons berth and built in Salisbury, owned by John Glover. From her cargo manifest, which is this very hard to read but exceptionally detailed record, we helped design the shape and dimensions of Hannah needed to hold those cargoes, whether they're stowed below or on deck. We looked at the sources listed here because the capabilities of Hannah and her crew in this battle were inextricably intertwined with what happened because of her nature, as we've described her, and because of what happened to her. And that'll become clear when we look into that battle in greater detail. So had that work by Phil Smith and Russell Knight been more widely read, particularly by these, particularly by the first three authorities on the next slide, and the model builders of high reputation, Harold Hahn and Eric A.R. Ronberg Jr., the scale model representations of this Hannah would have been quite different as seen in the maritime museums, libraries, and historical societies of New England. These are the subject matter authorities that made the largest contribution to putting together this study. And Steve Klumps lives in Newburyport, and Alan Hovey, I believe, lives in Rockport, but I'll speak about him later on. Smith and Knight have passed on. These are subject matter authorities in the field of British North American colonial period maritime history and vessel design. The first three, Baker, Chappell, and Edson, played the most significant roles in how your Hannah is portrayed in ship models constructed from about 1945 to 1970, and those by hobbyists like I was to the present day. As we'll see later, the most significant influence on the models named Hannah, built prior to 1945, was quite a surprise. Captain Mike of Schooner fame worked with me in reevaluating and confirming my presentations of the Hannah versus Nautilus skirmish, including the pathfinding research of Alan B. Hovey, which again we'll speak about in a moment. So, as a builder of models of ships since 1967 and since about 1980, as a maritime historian and vessel biographer, it's only natural that in this study I would first seek other models named Hannah, and from there examine the research and sources those model builders and artists used to design and craft their models and their paintings. We may not have time to provide details about each of the many models and paintings we studied, but that discussion is provided in this deck and further down in the associated slide notes you can read at your leisure. In the case of the historical shipwright, be his ships painted on canvas, modeled to scale, or built as a life-size working replica, the responsibility to ensure accuracy becomes a liability. Though the amateur builder may only be passing time, once built, his model becomes an artifact. And the very nature of his hobby as ship modeler creates information which becomes a contribution to uncollected archives of maritime history. Dick Miles was the master shipwright on Californian and Lady Washington, both built on the West Coast. I make mention of that because many ship modeling clubs refer to themselves as model shipwrights. And here Miles reminds us of the responsibility for honest representation of one's work. Much of the joy of serious research comes from serendipitous finds. This is one of my most remarkable. Had this work not come to me, leading to correspondence with the author, who I believe has joined us this evening, the rest of my thesis about the likely appearance of our subject Hannah would never have justified publication. So some more on this model, which is now in the Abbott Library, but not named Hannah. Discovering this model and tracing its origin and history led us to a remarkable explanation of why the models in the most influential collections look as they do. The model was displayed in the exhibit I mentioned in 1876. It was on the cover of the Nautical Research Journal in 1953. It was in the collection of the Smithsonian Institution for a while, and then displayed in your library as early as 1951 and prominently displayed there present day. My wife and I photographed the model named Friendship extensively in your Abbott Public Library. A hunch from a now deceased friend of mine and fellow builder of models of ships led us to these photos on the right. And if you look closely, they're from the Boston Fisheries exhibit in the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia, for which the model was constructed and displayed. And there it appears on the cover of the Nautical Research Journal. But it's just called a Marblehead heel tapper. We reconstructed the entire peregrination of this model named Friendship from the time of its building by Captain John Briggio to present day in your library. And for some time, perhaps from, excuse me, from 1876 until 1951, the model was in the Smithsonian, but they had lost track of it. We told them it was in your library. This model named Friendship in Historic Beverly Collection is, this is the most predominant influence for the models displayed in the Marblehead Museum and in Addison Gallery in Phillips Academy. had the model in historic Beverly since 1974. Her deck layout probably came from the Friendship model, but other than that, she's unique across all the models we studied. She doesn't look like any other model named Hannah that we found. In this montage, we're illustrating the 2- and 3-dimensional representations of Marblehead or nearby owned fishing vessels. These are paintings in the Marblehead Museum for schooners Hannah and Joseph. The model Rebecca is in the Peabody Essex Museum, and the model Manchester is in Cape Ann Museum. Those all, we believe, influenced John Briggio in developing his model of Friendship, and also inspired these 2 models by Walter Levitt, one in the Addison Gallery, one in Marblehead, and these paintings by John Levitt. And we're going to look deeper into that as well. So, as I mentioned, it's the predominant influence for the mural in Abbott Hall, with some inspiration from the model Rebecca, and the watercolor drawings of schooners named Hannah, produced by John Faunce Levitt and Winthrop Pratt Jr., and a painting displayed in the U.S. Navy and other government museums and buildings. So here we see the strong influence of 2 models on this portrayal of a grand banker. Rebecca of Marblehead in the Peabody Essex Museum, and Friendship in the Abbott Library. However, we also note that the artist erred in the manner of fishing he portrayed, as we shall see in a moment. He shows these fishermen in dories. So both of the illustrations are based on ship models, but not the same model as we mentioned. This is based on Rebecca and the other on Friendship. The hand lining mode of fishing depicted in the Collins drawing is historically correct, although carrying the small boat on stern davits is not at that point in time. The Levitt painting depicts the dory mode of fishing, but that was of the 1830s and later. Despite having participated in and contributed generously to this study, our own United States Navy continues to display this work by John Faunce Levitt as a painted replica of your Hannah. And here's another variant of John Levitt's portrayal, primarily from the model named Friendship, with possibly some influence from Victor Grimwood's plan of a colonial fishing schooner he received from Howard Chappell. Winthrop Pratt Jr. is well known among maritime historians and model builders. I will guess that Pratt saw the Friendship model in Marblehead after the model was displayed there in 1951. This is an example of an Admiralty draft, which is sort of the progenitor of several versions named Hannah. It's very sparse, and you have to go a long way to get from there to a drawing I'm going to show you in a minute. This painting by Roy Cross shows an exceptionally oversized 4-course, it's called. And look at how small the crew member are portrayed. And this again is a portrayal of a 78 tons burthen schooner. I didn't study this encounter by Hannah on September 10th of 1775 with the British ship Lively, which preceded the Nautilus engagement. And I only include this watercolor as another example of how the Chappell Banks fishing schooner, adapted by Harold Hahn, has influenced visual artists as well as ship model makers. And Frank Vining Smith was an important American painter. This painting is inspired by the model named Hannah in the Addison Gallery. And so here we see a kind of circularity. Artists rely on scale models, while model makers often look for contemporary period art to inform their depiction of an historic vessel. So you'll recognize the Marblehead Historical Commission print of this watercolor in the upper left. The artist was familiar with the types of vessels that work in and out of Marblehead, and it includes from left to right a rather large pinky schooner, a 2-masted schooner with a fisherman's staysail between the masts, and the schooner prominent is a good representation of a true Marblehead fishing schooner of the 1820s, probably based on this model in PEM of the DC Beckett. And last, we have an American flag merchant brig and a dory in the right foreground. Clearly, the artist A.F. Biddle had no concept of the size of Hannah when he painted this. He portrays her as a much larger foretopsail schooner with a to'gallant-sail, or to'gallant-sail rather, and a gaff topsail not common until much later. It's a good example of an item which should either be retired from view or be accompanied by an interpretive placard which explains the errors just noted. Be assured it can be valuable to continue to display works with such placards as a way of demonstrating the evolution of our understanding of the appearance of a vessel. As with other vessel biography presentations, I learned something new as part of my preparation or from the audience, hopefully as well this evening. This was a recent addition which leads to a very fruitful exchange with the artist. He shows Hannah in a foretopsail schooner rig. Only recently was this model on the right retrieved from storage at Marblehead Museum. We're seeking descendants of the builder for more provenance. We found the builder's name on the bottom of the baseboard, which is not uncommon. And this one brings the count to 4 models in Marblehead historical collections, each presented at least initially as replicas and each one different from the others. So may I offer that thus we begin to understand why the commonly held view persists. These representations, narratives, paintings, and so forth, scale models, inform our view of historic vessels, even though no one knows their actual appearance. And representation by authorities in the field are seldom challenged, frequently repeated, and thus becoming enthroned as truth. Institutional considerations play a huge role in how our history is captured, cared for, interpreted, and presented to current and future generations. We empathize with you with limited budgets, display and storage space, and the passing of local multi-generational historians who, while living, never had their remembrances recorded or artifacts interpreted and preserved outside their family. So we're going to shift gears here and talk about the naval battle between Hannah and Nautilus. Here's a visual representation of the relative size of the two vessels in a contest where the determinants of the outcome were local knowledge, nature, bad luck, and Yankee grit. The larger drawing is a British Admiralty draft, a design plan for Nautilus. The smaller drawing is our new interpretation of Hannah, which we'll investigate later. This annotated chart of Beverly Harbor gives us a seabird's view of the battle. Hannah is the small yellow arrow right there, and Nautilus, the larger blue arrows, as we see their track and eventual grounding for both of them. We also see the positions of the Beverly citizenry and militia and those of Salem on the bluff to the south. Note that the distances indicated are the range of the weapons, not the distance between the combatants. The length of the colored arrows represent those distances. Part 4, epilogue of my monograph, analyzes this battle in great detail and challenges other accounts and details about Hannah. If you'll permit me a glass of water here, I would like to read something to you from that epilogue. And we'll keep the chart on the screen so you can follow what I'm talking about. Hold on just one second, please. And I'll change reading glasses. Here is my description of this engagement, which I call a quote, turning of the tides. In welcomed approaching darkness, the justifiably indignant citizens of tiny Beverly, Massachusetts, raised a cheer of derision and relief, mocking that even after 2 determined attempts by the crew of His Majesty's ship Nautilus to dislodge their much larger combatant from her own predicament on the channel's edge, it was only by the favorable evening tide that they gained deeper water and escaped to the open sea. Until Nautilus unexpectedly took the ground that same afternoon, the much smaller Hannah was the one in great peril. Outmanned, outgunned, and intentionally ashore on the northern edge of the Beverly Channel, roughly east of what is now Independence Park, Hannah was taking fire from the British warship. Capitalizing on the ebbing tide, Nicholson Broughton immediately ordered Hannah be stripped of small arms, swivels, and anything else of utility or value. Our captain had no ability to get his 3-pounder carriage guns and their shot and appurtenances overside into a viable conveyance. No matter, as he knew full well, they would have been inconsequential in defending against the much larger and heavier armed Nautilus. Instead of first racing for the relative safety of Beverly Harbor, had Captain Broughton known or taken advantage of the small battery of field pieces assembled on Salem Neck, he might have made for that lee and otherwise unwelcoming shore and the possibility of luring Nautilus into a trap, forcing her to strike her colors or even sinking her. To avoid Hannah's fate, John Collins, captain of Nautilus, after closely, enticingly, almost within grape shot of the disabled schooner, prudently elected to anchor some 400 yards distant from his coveted prize. He then began firing into the town, but only briefly. By turns, the 30 aboard Hannah, mostly citizen soldiers and not sailors, went over the side into water at or above their heads. Few could swim. With the taller and stronger among them most heavily laden, each slogged their way through more than 50 yards of sucking shallows until the sandy bottom beneath their feet was finally exposed by the receding water. With help from others having come down from the bluff, Hannah's exhausted and anxious crew were eventually able to join their brethren in deterring Nautilus from further threatening the community. Collins' intention to board and burn Hannah was frustrated once the privateer was completely aground and out of reach of boats from Nautilus. Additionally, rounds into their schooner roused the impassioned Beverly citizenry. They quickly directed angry swivel gun and marginally effective musket fire from the Beverly shore. Soon, heavier 4- and 6-pounder field pieces joined the fight, laid by Salem townspeople across the channel on Old Hospital Point. Aiming high by design or error, they ultimately ensured Nautilus got far worse than she gave. Collins then endured the embarrassment of his own ship taking the ground. In failing to spring and then kedge the sloop round in an attempt to get from under this indefensible barrage, 2 anchors from Nautilus would be abandoned. To add further insult, his command had become effectively careened, her cannon now unable to be laid against Hannah or the town. It was not until nearly dark that Nautilus, suffering 2 human casualties, escaped on an eventually rising tide. The British King's nettlesome 16-gun sloop would require significant repairs to fully regain her station and execute her orders along the coast. Yet early the following morning, doing his duty regardless of damage sustained, Captain Collins evened the score off Thatcher's Island. Quote, made sail and gave chase at 7, brought to a schooner from Barbados laden with cacao, bound to Salem, put a petty officer and 3 men on board her, at 10 made sail and took her in tow. She was the Charming Polly, to be condemned and sold in Boston. With like determination, wasting no time waiting for Nautilus to be hulled down outside the harbor, the Beverly folk returned to stranded Hannah by lantern light, secured her against the risen tide, and carefully piloted her into the harbor and back to a berth at Glover's Wharf. Her consorts, also formerly private vessels, but unlike Hannah, given new names, Hancock, Franklin, Lee, Warren, and Lynch, were also to be converted at that wharf. Efforts to refit and arm these schooners for service as quickly as possible would command the majority of available shipwrights, carpenters, riggers, painters, and blacksmiths. Some of their carriage guns would have to come all the way from Newburyport. Lessons learned from the lopsided Nautilus encounter no doubt informed that work and encouraged it be done expeditiously. Hannah's turn would come, but her repairs, to the extent they were eventually completed, would not send her back to sea as an armed vessel in the service of the Continental forces. Sometime between October 22nd, when Broughton took command of Hancock, and November 6th, 1775, Hannah was decommissioned. The paragraphs above are somewhat conjectural. We were not there, we do not know. The actual fate of this Hannah remains an untold tale. However, it makes blunt sense that the citizens and Broughton's crew would make every effort to get their schooner back to the wharf. Surprisingly, after Hannah was stripped or striped, as in whipped or lashed, by the guns of the Nautilus for 4 hours, one account of the Beverly citizenry says she was damaged very little, if any. Certainly they would not have left her to become a drifting navigation hazard in that small channel. Of greatest importance, the scarcity of cannon of any weight of shot demanded her carriage guns be salvaged, a task more easily performed, wharf side. I'm going to stop there in the interest of time and go to the next slide here. This misfiled document was located for me by a diligent gentleman in the Library of Congress. With enlarging it, it's quite legible. The debate continues about the final disposition of Hannah after the battle. We agree with Alan Hovey that Hannah was probably repaired, but disagree about where and when that was done or by whom, and what happened to the schooner after those repairs. We disagree that she had her name changed and was soon pursuing other misadventures, because if she returned to service or was sold, she does not appear under that name thereafter in any of the vessel registers that we could find. So let's talk about the how we developed a more accurate interpretation of the appearance of your Hannah. Notice I'm not calling this a replica. I'm calling it an informed speculation. I vigorously lobby, if you will, against the word replica. So here's the process we followed. We found selected drafts or plans of contemporary British and American vessels. We had only one contemporary draft of an American-built schooner in that period, and that's Sultana, which we saw earlier. We located a small number of sloops or schooners in the British Admiralty records. David Ancherl helped me find some of those that were of similar size and gave us information about a hull form and other details thankfully preserved for our study. These contemporary paintings, two of which we saw earlier, are the only ones from that region which provide sufficient detail from which we might get a sense of the appearance of Hannah. Baltic was built 2 years after Hannah, the others somewhat later. This Hannah is not Glover's Hannah. Ironically, that portion of Salisbury where his Hannah was built is now part of the town of Amesbury, where the 1797 Hannah was built. It's important to keep in mind that Hannah was a very common name for vessels in that region. We also looked at paintings, and there are two very nearly identical paintings of beautiful schooner Raven, the design of which was a principal influence in developing a new interpretation of Hannah. This style of ship portraiture with the stern view of the vessel going away and enlarged here was common for about 100 years. As we'll see momentarily, the sheer view of Raven above the waterline was combined with the underbody of the midship station of the 57-foot sloop and some aspects from the draft of Sultana. Although I did not draw a new sail plan or masting and rigging plan for our Hannah, I recommended adapting the one from Sultana because we have primary source data about her rigs, one with topsails and one without. We also looked at the deck layout of models known to have been built in that area, and we adapted that for the new Hannah interpretation. Many of these elements will be seen almost universally on vessels of her size and type across more than a century. When we inspect the drawings for the new Hannah, I'll point out something that distinguishes her as a 45 tons burthen schooner from 78 tons burthen. The principal dimensions of the hull, the length on the keel for tonnage, the length between perpendiculars and others, were interpolated by working with the dimensions used in the tons burthen calculation formula of that period, which, as I mentioned, is the internal carrying capacity. It's the relationship between the measurements shown above, the breadth, the depth, and hold, which is greater and not the same as a draft. And as I read, knowing her draft was an important factor in understanding the Nautilus engagement. Here's a composite view showing the load water lines, the station lines, and the buttock lines. And here we have diagonals, which are slices fore to aft in the hull. uh, that are necessary to be developed so that the hull can be planked. Other sheets in the set of drawings present different views, including a proposed framing schema for model makers and builders of full-sized vessels. This is a beautiful model, in my opinion, of Hannah, built by Mike Morris, who couldn't join us this evening, from plans and narrative in consultation with David Ancherl and Niles Nordquist. And here you can see those pairs of timbers, and just picture the cannon barrel poking out between those. Those are the stanchions to which the tackle for containing the recoil of the carriage guns are attached. And in our report, we explain in great detail, including other illustrations, why we developed this kind of a design. And here's another view of the model under construction. We can see all of these things which people call deck furniture in general. They're just placed, they haven't been installed yet, nor has the deck been planked rather. So this will give you a sense of the heights and proportions of the mast, and to complete masting and rigging for a model is itself a considerable effort. So may I offer some bits of wisdom from this inquiry. Maybe I'm being the champion of the obvious in some cases, but repeating the statements of a person in authority does not ensure their accuracy or make them true. The same is true for visual two-dimensional or three-dimensional representations of a vessel. The passage of time both obscures our history and brings new sources or reasons to question old sources. If a vessel is touched on only in passing, like in a part of a larger narrative, we're less likely to see an accurate description of it. But where the vessel is the focal point of the author or the artist, we're more likely to get somewhere toward that. The features and functions are always related to its purpose, whether design purpose or an adapted purpose. And to understand them, oftentimes it's helpful to look at one of those features or functions and say, how was this used? And with ships and boats especially, it's beneficial to the author or artist to bone up on the technology. That's why it became essential to understand the Hannah versus Nautilus skirmish and aftermath in the context of the genesis of Hannah. In other words, her appearance, her rig, where she was built, her condition, who owned her, all of those kinds of things, and reciprocally to correctly interpret the many versions of reported for their skirmish in terms of what it was possible and not possible for Hannah and her officers and crew to do under those conditions. This is an unsolicited public service announcement. Rob and I have been friends for nearly 50 years, and these institutions and private parties turn to Rob without hesitation to care for their truly priceless models in their collections. And his book is available from Sea-Watch Books. So any researcher and writer worth her or his salt shows their sources, and what follows will illustrate where we went and why and what we learned. So these are the kinds of things that we looked at, and that's what anybody would do if they were trying to understand the appearance of a vessel, particularly one where it wasn't known, but also for some where we have some information. They're certainly not infallible, but we look at them and we test them for reasonableness, and we proceed as best we can. On this work, the first two gentlemen on the list became the foundation for my decision to pursue a new interpretation. And the last two led me to primary source material specific to your Hannah and to others of her sister merchant and fishing schooners and West Indies traders built near the Merrimack River above Cape Ann. And had Chad and Knight's study been read more widely, particularly by these first three individuals, the scale model representations of this Hannah would have been quite different. Captain Mike and Captain Harold Burnham were among the first to bring a serious and credible reconstruction of a New England 1812 privateer to life with schooner fame of Salem Sound, and Mike is himself a student of the Hannah Nautilus affair. and he acquaints his passengers with the battle when he sails out in Salem Sound. I'm going to identify the ship modelers of both small scale and full in the portrayal of Hannah. We have not learned who would have been commissioned to build a 1968 sailing Hannah. So we have Eric Ronberg, Harold Hahn, and Harold Burnham. If you read this scholarly pamphlet, this is the first published photo of the model presently in the Marblehead Museum and for decades labeled as your Hannah. In these scholarly works, Chappell, because he was the first mover in studying American sailing vessels, both merchant and naval, has a deserved reputation upon which many relied for the interpretation of a vessel's appearance. However, as we saw in the presentation, Chap often projected from very little detail provided in original drafts, be they British, French, Dutch, Swedish, and others, even American. So this is the first presentation of a plan of a Marblehead schooner by Chappell. And you may recall that very, very scarce, washed out Admiralty draft called Marble.head. That's the basis from which many began to develop an interpretation of Hannah, however inaccurate it turned out to be. And this draft is the foundation of the models of Hannah, originally in PEM and the Smithsonian. In 1942, Chappell gave the drawing in the next slide to Grimwood for inclusion in his book. 30 years later, Chappell included the drawing in his monumental study of American and Canadian fishing schooners, his last book. 8 years later, Harold Hahn gathers his work on colonial schooners. One subject is Hannah, for which Harold provides plans and guidance for model makers. So this is the first adaptation of a Chappell drawing of a Banks fishing schooner. The second adaptation of that drawing went to Grimwood, and then Harold Hahn adopted it for making a model of Hannah. These scholarly works, two of them are by Marblehead historians. Hannah is mentioned in naval documents of the American Revolution by William Bell Clark, but George Athenbilius was the first to study and publish about Hannah in any detail. The Essex Institute piece by Collins focuses on the Hannah Nautilus affair, and Beatty and Collins are also prominent in the 1968 attempt to build a new Hannah for Beverly. William Fowler provides a photo of the Smithsonian model named Hannah, but little else about her appearance. Chester Hearn goes beyond Hannah to describe her successors in service to Washington, and I would encourage you to read that if you're interested in them. Nelson follows Hearn, but with little mention of Hannah and nothing about her last battle. All of these are what I called survey works, not vessel biographies. I would encourage you to read Patrick O'Donnell for the most authoritative account of Glover and his Marblehead Marines. It's only a minor mention of Hannah, and Patrick and I discussed my findings on Hannah afterwards. He actually called me up. Thank you, Patrick, for your generosity and encouragement. General Washington's Ship of War, Secret Lives of the Hannah Lynch. It's an unpublished manuscript by Alan Hovey. It's an exceptionally thorough research, a pathfinder for others in primary sources. But Hovey's claims were offered as motivation for the 91 attempt by the citizens of Beverly to build a new sailing Hannah. And then you have my study, which if you really want to get deep into our arguments that led to this new interpretation and to the narrative I wrote about the battle, then you can find a bound copy in the Beverly Library. Thank you very much. And I learned this evening from Lauren that they also have a bound copy in the Marblehead Museum. The entire 5 parts of this study are available in PDF. You can download them from academia.edu, or you can make a request to me and I'll send them to you as email attachments, including the drawings. Part 4, Hannah 2. Your Hannah 2 would have followed in company with other vessels sailing today. which bear the names of important ships in our American and European history. I'm sure many of you have seen or sailed in, excuse me, not sailed in, but toured Mayflower 2. Maybe John Paul Jones' sloop Providence has been interpreted. Santa Maria in 1964, a new iteration of her was built based on new research. The Pilgrim 2, which was for a long time in Dana Point Harbor, but it's since sank in her dock and was destroyed. Henry Hudson's Half Moon, Sir Francis Drake's Golden Hind, and I mentioned earlier Lady Washington. Those are all sailing interpretations of historic vessels. So did you know that they made at least 2 attempts, City of Beverly, towards building a full-size interpretation of Hannah, which would grace the Beverly waterfront? Each of them failed. Mayor James A. Vitale mentions consulting with Howard Chappell. I knew Chap a little, and I'm presently investigating the possibility of a new biography of the former Smithsonian curator. Prior to this 1968 campaign to build a new Hannah, a Beverly Historical Commission sought funds to be allocated annually toward a 1975 celebration of the 200th anniversary of our nation's founding. That initiative failed as well. The proposed full-scale Hannah was never constructed. As we learned from this letter and one other, its design was influenced by the work of Chappell as adapted by William Avery Baker. According to Eleanor Sperry, the widow of John Sperry, her husband joined Mayor Vitale's committee and engaged William Baker for these drawings. Baker and Chappell were lifelong friends and professional colleagues. One of the work products Sperry commissioned of Baker was this builder's half hull to provide a visual sense of the shape and appearance of the new Hannah. The poor lighting obscures the lift or bread and butter style in which this type of model is traditionally made. If the 1968 campaign to build Hannah 2 had succeeded, the schooner may have looked like this lovely 1:96 scale model constructed years later by my lifelong friend Eric A.R. Ronberg Jr., built from plans by his close friend and mentor William Avery Baker, which we just saw. Our mutual friend and celebrated Salem artist, Racket Shreve, provided this watercolor and several other works intended to illustrate Alan B. Hovey's book mentioned in the next slide. This is the second failed attempt to fund the building of a full-size sailing Hannah in 1991. In recent months, I was able to reconnect with Alan about his exceptional research, which benefits all of us. The latter was considered earlier this evening. Although we have different opinions about his conclusions, anyone who is able to study his report will undoubtedly appreciate his effort and affection for your local history. Had Harold Burnham been awarded the contract to construct a new full-size Hannah in '91, he would have used this builder's half hull, made in the same style as the Matheson model seen earlier, fashioned by his own hand as the foundation for building her anew. Although the goal might be realized of making her as true to what we perceive the original Hannah to have looked like, below the waterline, certain accommodations will be necessary for Coast Guard licensing, safety, ease of handling under power and docking or when there's no wind. We might celebrate in a way that this project and the 1968 project failed because what we have learned about her since tells us the schooner would not have been faithful to the original Hannah if for no other reason than both were designed with a tons burthen of 78. As promised earlier, we have in-depth discussions about each of the models named Hannah we studied. But before I move to that, Lauren, let me just check in with you. How are we doing on time?
But we are just at about 8 o'clock. So
All
I'm
right.
gonna leave
Well,
some
then,
time for questions too. Do you want to go through
okay,
this
then
quickly?
I'm going to stop here. We have produced a PDF of all of the notes pages for this, which have a thumbnail of the slide and then the comments below. And we can send that to anyone who's interested in it as an email attachment. So here we go for Q&A.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. That was so wonderful to hear all about it, but I know you had to condense it. So I do encourage people to read the wonderful monograph that we have available at the museum, but also Randy very graciously offered, well, it's available at Academia, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Perfect.
Shall I
Great.
stop my sharing here?
Sure. So anybody who signed up, we will be forwarding
there.
you tomorrow the recording link as well as the PDF notes. Does anybody have any questions? You can put them in the chat or certainly use the raise hand function and we'll ask you to unmute. Can I start, Randy, while people are thinking about their questions? How did you determine that the ship, if I understood you correctly, it would only go out so far and then return to port at the end of the evening? And how far out would it go, if I understood you correctly?
We found that in official papers between her captain and other folks. She had something like 300 on board of armed, mostly farmers and some sailors. So she was very crowded. And even though there's a claim that they built sleeping platforms down below, the vessel way too small to accommodate that many people. And that's why they didn't stay out overnight. How far out they went, probably not very far offshore, quite frankly, because they weren't heavily armed, and if they got caught, as they almost did by Nautilus, then it would have been over with.
A question in the chat. Did you come across in your research whether it was the Hannah was named for Glover's wife or daughter?
I frankly didn't pay a lot of attention to that because it didn't have any bearing on trying to get at her appearance. But I think in some of the books that I showed there, particularly the ones by Marblehead historians, I think that's clarified in there.
Questions from those in the Zoom? Okay. We have a lot of nice comments in the chat thanking you for your research, for sharing your non-bias and approach. So certainly thank you for that.
Well, it's quite an honor to be invited to do this, and I hope that we didn't have a bunch of drop off, and that this was was a worthwhile investment of everyone's time this evening. So thank you all very much. I greatly appreciate it. And on one of the slides we didn't get to, but I provided my email address, and if anybody wants to contact me directly, I'm certainly available to you.
Perfect. And like I said, we will send all that out probably tomorrow. So check out your emails, whatever email you use to sign up for tonight. Oh, Christine asked if the Navy did sell the Hannah, why do you think that they did that?
Can you repeat that one, please?
Sorry. If the Navy did sell the Hannah, why would they have done so?
I'm sorry if I misled on that point. Number one, the U.S. Navy wasn't founded by then. That's a small point, but they never owned this Hannah. She was leased or rented to George Washington. And after the Nautilus engagement, it was made plain that she wasn't suitable to continue in that role, whether she'd been damaged or not. So she just disappeared from service for the Continental Forces. And I think she was probably repaired. I think Glover may have just used her as an additional wharf at Glover's Wharf, to a storehouse vessel, or he may have put her back into private use. But you have to bear in mind, she was 10 years old when he leased her to Washington. For a wooden vessel in that period, and especially one that had been to the Caribbean, she was probably down on her luck and needed a lot more repair than as a result of the battle damage. Does that help clarify?
I think so. Thank you. Gina asked, did any institutions bristle at learning that their Hannah wasn't accurate? And if so, or in any case, would they consider making any changes to their models?
Well, to your credit, Lauren, I made a suggestion and drafted a placard to put on your model of Hannah there in the Lee Mansion, and you very kindly did that, explaining the the provenance of the model. I think this evening may be the first time that some of these other institutions understand the genealogy, if you will, of their models. So I don't think they would bristle or object. I mean, we're all professional people. We all learn something new every day. If somebody comes up with information that I didn't have, or they think that based on the research I did, a different interpretation of Hannah is worthwhile, I encourage them to put it out there, because that's really why I did this, is to get people thinking about it. And Saturday morning, I'm going to be doing a portion of this for members of the Nautical Research Guild who are model builders. And I'm going to encourage them to challenge me too, because the closer we can get to a new interpretation that's based on sound, solid primary sources for the most part, then we all win.
One of the great things I think about your research from a museum professional and a historian is that it allows us to understand sort of where the person who made our models was coming from and what they understood and why they built the models the way they did. And now we know that's changed, but I think it's still very valid for us to display that, but with the information such as you provided. So thank you for
Well,
that.
thank you. I wish we'd had the time to get into the back end, but again, it's available in the notes pages, because I explain in great detail what all the influences were for every one of the models that we saw. And there were a dozen or more, which we weren't able to see this evening.
Wonderful. All right. Well, you're getting lots of accolades in the chat and on the screen here. So, well, I want to thank you very much, Randy, for joining us and sharing all of this knowledge with us. We really appreciate it. I'll be sending, or Jarrett Zeman will be sending out the slides and all the other information within a day or so. Thank you to Deborah and the Smith family for honoring Mike by allowing us to give this presentation tonight. Thank you
Most
all.
welcome. It's great.
Lauren, might you and Jared have a moment or two after the Zoom is closed?
Absolutely.
Thank
All
you
right,
very much.
everybody. Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Jared had to jump off, but he
Oh,
was
that's
on for
fine.
most of it. But I'm certainly can convey anything that you like.
Well
me
done,
to.
Randy.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Great job, sweetheart.
Oh, thanks, Rita. Couldn't have done it without you.
Okay. I'm going to sign off.
Okay.